What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video, and today we're going over the Stamina Necromancer Bow build. So this was one that actually took me quite a bit of trying out, very similar to the the Bow Stamina Warden DPS, just because of the various different combinations you could do with your spammables, particularly for necromancers, where you have things like Venom Skull, you have Blastbones, you have a lot of class abilities that you can take advantage of as a ranged bow build. So I actually did a few tests here and there to try to figure out what exactly would be one of the better rotations. And I did eventually find one that pulled very good DPS, but it ended up being also quite complex. For this build video, I will be showing you that rotation just so you guys can see just how complicated it can become. But I will also show you the DPS parse of a far simpler rotation that I think you guys might find more palatable, just because the rotation's a lot simpler compared to this complex rotation centering around Blastbones. So just like the rest of our build videos, we won't be going over any sort of gear. Gear is covered in the Bow DPS gear video, which will be popping up in the upper right hand corner right about now. So go ahead and check out that video if you're interested in knowing what gear I'm running. Come back here, we'll be talking about skills and obviously the rotation. So first, let's get things started here with a really brief summary of the sets we're running, as well as the CP, because we are on a Necromancer, so that does mean we need to adjust our CPs accordingly to adjust for our penetration passive. So the gear we're running is still 1-piece Kra'gh, 1-piece Slimecraw, 5 Relequen, 5 Tzogvins, as we have seen across the other stamina builds. But our CP is going to be a little bit different, because we do have additional 1500 penetration from our Necromancer passives, so we don't need as much into piercing. So if we're running Tzogvins and 1-piece Kra'gh, we're able to drop piercing down to 18. This is still a little bit overpen, but this should hit all the jump points, and you will have a little bit of additional penetration in case your debuff uptimes aren't as good. The only reason why we're overpenning here with full debuffs is because we aren't able to hit the jump points and still be able to maintain full penetration. So this is the CP setup you should have if you're running 2 armor penetration. So that'd be Tzogvins and Kra'gh. So we have 64 mighty, 18 piercing, 61 precise strikes, 61 thaumaturge, and 66 master at arms. Now, if you're only running 1 armor penetration bonus, then you're going to want to run the 32-33 piercing CP. And if you have no armor piercing bonuses, physical penetration bonuses, then you're going to want to run the 60 to 62 points into piercing that I covered in the gear video. And again, that's because we do have additional penetration through our Necromancer passives under the class lines. So with that covered, let's go ahead and go over our skill bars. So again, this is going to be the most complex, but also the most DPS that I managed to pull. So we have Lethal Arrow here. This is going to be one of your main spambles. Then we have Blighted Blastbones, which is kind of our second spamble, so to speak. Then we have Detonating Siphon, so we're slotting this for the damage done, and you can still use it at range. It has a 28-meter range, so you're still able to run this. Then we have 2 fighter skilled abilities, so these are going to be your flex spots. We have Barbed Trap and Camouflaged Hunter, and then we have Flawless Dawnbreaker on the front bar here. If you are not running Precise on your front bar weapon, let's say you're running Infused, then you can replace this with Pestilent Colossus instead. With 2 Gravelord abilities on the front bar and Execute, your crit chance should be about 96.7. So if we were to slot the Colossus, we'd be pumping it up to 106.7. So we're basically missing out on 6.7% crit chance. So it's up to you whether you want to add in that 3rd Gravelord ability on the front bar or not. This is with a precise weapon, so if you're running Infused, then you will need to run an additional Gravelord ability. So just keep that in mind, that 2 is fine for precise, but 3 is what you're going to need if you're not running precise. On our back bar, we have Skeletal Archer, Poison Injection, Endless Hail. We have Detonating Siphon again, although we're not really going to be using it too much on the back bar. This is just for the additional damage done bonus. Then we have Avid Boneyard. We are running this still for the additional sustain. You can run the other morph, which is Unnerving Boneyard, for AoE Major Fracture, Major Breach. Then we have Pestilent Colossus. So you will notice here on the back bar we have 4 Gravelord abilities, and that's just because we don't have Precise on the back bar. Our back bar crit chance is going to be on the lower side compared to our front bar crit chance because of that, and so we are running 4 Gravelord abilities here in order to make up for that. In theory, you should only need 3, so you could potentially swap out Detonating Siphon for something else if you don't want the additional damage done passive bonus there. So you can swap out 1 Gravelord ability here, and you'd still be around, I believe it should be about 2% crit chance. So with 4, you're hitting 100. You're wasting about 2%, which is not as bad as wasting, almost 7% crit chance. And again, 2 flex spots here on the front bar, 1 on the back bar here. So if you need like a self heal, you can replace any of those abilities with Echoing Vigor. You will end up losing a little bit of DPS because you are missing your weapon damage or your damage done bonus, depending on what abilities you end up swapping out. If you want some even more mitigation, you can run something like Evasion for the major evasion. And then, of course, you have other abilities that you could run as well. For example, if you want to get some more ultimate during trash pulls, you can put down Necrotic Potency and just use that between trash pulls, for example. So any ability you really want to put on here, you can just replace your fighter skill abilities on the front bar or Detonating Siphon on the back bar. So just kind of pick and choose which ones you want to replace here. But that pretty much covers it for this particular setup. Now, I did mention that I've tried out a couple of other setups here. So the other setup I tried out was actually this exact setup, but instead of running Blastbones, I didn't run Blastbones, I just used straight up Lethal Arrow spam. That ended up pulling a little bit less, but because we're not running Blastbones, it made the rotation a lot simpler. The other one I tried was Venom Skull instead of Lethal Arrow. So here you would have the 3 Gravelord abilities here on the front bar. Nothing you can really do to avoid that in this case. So you just have to deal with the fact that you're going to be over-critting in Execute. And then we'd use Blastbones and Venom Skull instead as our spambles. So those are the 3 main ones that I tried out. I also tried out things like dropping Boneyard and putting in a fighter skill ability here. That ended up dropping DPS and dropping sustain to the point where I didn't think it was worth doing so. I also tried things like not running, for example, certain abilities. So I tried not just dropping entirely Detonating Siphon. That didn't end up doing anything because it doesn't cost anything to cast, so might as well just use it. So ultimately, what I ended up doing was I ended up just doing with Lethal Arrow with the Blastbones here, and I will talk about the rotation and why it's kind of complicated in a little bit here. So first, I'm going to move ahead and move the 21 million dummy to its proper position, so we can do our 21 million dummy parse later. Nope, still not targetable. This one's a little bit tricky. There we go. So the rotation for Blastbones, it's a little bit tricky, and it also depends on what spam bar you're using. If you're using Lethal Arrow, you're gonna timing's gonna be a little bit different because Lethal Arrow does have a 1-second cast time, which you kind of have to factor in. So the thing with Blastbones is, we're going to demonstrate it here on the 3 million dummy here. The farther away you are, the longer it takes for Blastbones to get there. So let's say we're at the maximum distance of Blastbones. You can see that it did take a little bit of a longer time to get there compared to if I was a little bit closer. So if I was like maybe half that distance, roughly speaking, by using Blastbones, it ends up being a little bit less. Now, if you're keeping close eye on the timer, it does seem like they both get there at about the same time, but it's like a few milliseconds, a couple hundred milliseconds difference, and that does make a difference when it comes to your overall rotation. But generally speaking, you can essentially expect, if you're using the Venom Lethal Arrow spamble, you can expect to be able to use 2 between each Blastbones cast. See here with 2. Now if you're running Venom Skull instead, because that is an instant cast ability, you will have to use more of them. So if we go ahead and replace that with the Venom Skull and do the Blastbones, you'll see we'll have to do 3 here for each Blastbone cast. So generally speaking, in between each Blastbone, you should be doing 3 abilities, unless you are using Venom Arrow or Lethal Arrow as a spammable. Because of that cast time, it adds in just a little bit more delay between each cast of Lethal Arrow. So if you're using Lethal Arrow as a spammable, you might be able to get away with 2 abilities between each Blastbones cast if one of those abilities happens to be Lethal Arrow. To be safe, you should be using 3 abilities when you're using Lethal Arrow. If one of them is Lethal Arrow, unless you're doing 2 Lethal Arrows back to back, in which case you're going to want to use just straight Blastbones. So you can see here there's a lot of if this, then that, for those of you guys who are programmers out there. So very, very complicated. Luckily, if you're running Venom Skull as your spamble, it's just 3 abilities between each Blastbones cast, so that's pretty straightforward. And of course, if you're just using Lethal Arrows as spamble, you just use Lethal Arrow and just keep an eye on your dots and just re-up your dots whenever they need to be renewed. So a lot of different things if you're going with what I found to be the best setup, which was Lethal Arrow with Blastbones, because you are going to have to figure out, okay, what's my timing for Blastbones, when do I use Blastbones, and all that stuff. So that rotation is definitely the most complex, and that's what I'm going to demonstrate for you guys today on the 21 million dummy, just so you guys can get an idea of the most complex rotation, but it's also the one that ended up giving me the best results. Now, I also did do other parses, and you will be able to see that at the, yeah, I have enough space. You'll be able to see that when we do our 21 million dummy parse here. So like our other bow builds, you are going to want to try to get as far away as you possibly can, which is going to be 28 meters. Is right about here. Blastbones has a range of 28 meters. Skeletal Archer can hit 28 meters targets, so targets that are 28 meters away, and then you have Detonating Siphon, which also is 28 meters. Poison Injection and Endless Hail are also 28 meters, so in an ideal scenario, you're going to want to be that full 28 meters away. You might not necessarily be able to do that, so you're just going to want to try to get as far away as you possibly can, and that's in order to make use of the Long Shot ability here. Under the bow line, which increases damage done against targets with bow abilities. So if you're running Venom Skull, it would be Endless Hail and Poison Injection, but if you're using Lethal Arrow, you definitely want to make sure to get the Long Shot's passive bonus here. So we're going to go ahead and do a 21 million dummy parse. Now, like I mentioned in all my other DPS build videos, the 21 million dummy parse is not a one-to-one translation to in-raid performance. In raid, you have things like mechanics, and you're getting different buffs and debuffs. Also, you have to factor in uptimes. So, for example, here we're missing things like Martial Knowledge and Zen's Redress, so we're not able to get the maximum amount of debuffs active here. On the flip side, we also have 100% Major Force here, which is obviously not something that's realistic in an actual trial. So we have a little bit of DPS drop in raids, which is sort of made up for with Martial Knowledge and Zens and other sort of debuffs. Plus, Sustain is also not going to be identical either. So in an actual trial scenario, you are going to have things like Symphony of Blades, the Master's Restoration staff bonus, and so on, additional synergies to activate your Undaunted passives, which help boost your overall Sustain. We are using Lava Foot to help try to simulate in-raid Sustain, but that is not a complete one-to-one comparison either. The 21 million dummy here should be used as a point of comparison to other bow builds. It should not be used as an indication of your in-raid trial performance. So, with all that said and done, let's go ahead and get started, and hopefully I won't screw up this rotation too badly. I do have a saved parse earlier from today that I will show you guys in case this parse does end up being bad, but hopefully I won't screw up the rotation that badly. So let's go ahead and hope for the best. So I'm using 2 lethal arrows, and then I can do Blastbones. So since I'm not using lethal arrow for any of these... Oh, my ultimate didn't go off. This is... okay. That's funky. Come on. Okay, so that's a little bit weird how the Siphon wasn't really hitting things. Might be because there's like a lip here. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to move closer so it's going to be more consistent. So I'll just reset the dummy here. Begin my ultimate. Sorry about that. I didn't realize that there would be that sort of line of sight issue here with Siphons, Detonating Siphon. I guess that's another thing you also want to consider here as you're moving far away. There is the line of sight issue. So as you saw with Detonating Siphon, part of it is the line of sight issue. I think that little lip there just made the targeting system not recognize that the corpse was there from Blastbones. So just be mindful of where you're standing in comparison to where the boss is. If you aren't getting that proper line of sight, some of your abilities might not work. And it's also the same with Blastbones. I know Blastbones also has line of sight issues as well, so just be mindful of that. Alright, we set the dummy. Now let's go ahead and get started. And again, hopefully I won't screw up the rotation that badly. And 2 lethal arrows so I can do Blastbones. So since we're not using Lethal Arrow, we want to use 3 abilities, and then use Lethal Arrow. This is 2 Lethal Arrows, so 2 Lethal Arrows, then Blastbones. 3 abilities, then Blastbones. So you can see here, it's a lot of making that judgment call. I will mention here that you will want to get Detonating Siphon to completely run out before you renew it, because there is an explosion. Ah, shoot. That has happened to me before, where because they increased the range on the detection radius for Siphon, sometimes you'll siphon the corpse that's right next to you, which is the archer. Just be mindful of that. Just make sure you're always facing and it happened again. These are what I was talking about when I was talking about bad parses. Yeah, this one looks like it's going to be a bad parse. As you can see here, definitely a little bit complex. Please work, Siphon. Whoops. Didn't mean to do that ability. Oh, this parse is just terrible. I mean, you're getting the general idea of the parse, but this is just an embarrassment of a parse right now. Getting better, but definitely still not as good as the other parse I was doing earlier. At this point, I'm just going to lethal arrow spam to the end since we're at low health. So yeah, not the greatest parse. Screwed up quite a bit there. So 75.9, that's not bad, even with the crap parse. A couple of bugs here and there with Siphon. To be expected, but find the right parse. So this is the parse that I did with lethal arrow and blighted Blastbones here. 76.9k, so about a 1k difference here. So yeah, this is closer to what you would expect to see, so a little bit closer to 77. But Yeah, very complex. A lot of things to kind of keep track of here. So definitely something that if you want a very involved rotation, this is the right build for you. Other parses that I did. So this one was with lethal arrow spam, no blighted Blastbones, so a lot simpler to maintain, but sustain was also a little bit worse here. So if we take a look at our stamina, a lot worse sustain compared to this one, which was the lethal arrow with Blastbones. You can see no real issues with sustain at all here. But if you're just using lethal arrow spam, it's going to be a little bit difficult to sustain it here. And then this parse here, this is the 73.3. This is with Venom Skull and Blighted Blastbones. So you can see here, Venom Skull combined is doing, let's see, 1.3. This is 3.5, 4.8. That's about 9.3, so about even with Blastbones. So not as strong of a spam build compared to Lethal Arrow, but the advantage of running Venom Skull is it's an instant cast. You don't necessarily get caught in sort of that cast time. So you, like when you're cast timing, you can't block, you can't dash, you can't really do anything much except move at a very essentially a snail's pace. So there might be some fights where running Lethal Arrow is not going to be viable just because of the nature of the fight, like Asylum hard mode or Asylum in general, because you have to run around for Storm to Heavens. In those instances, you might just want to run Venom Skull instead of Lethal Arrow. But that is it for this build video. Sorry for all of the bugs and weirdness that was going on there. Necromancers still have a couple of kinks, as you can tell, in their class abilities. But I hope you guys enjoyed. If you guys have any questions at all, feel free to leave them down in the comment section below. I'll try to answer them to the best of my ability. Again, hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.